Today I received a query about what to do about one's Easter duty if the churches will be closed until Pentecost. I was heartened to discover that someone was so well catechized as to know about the Easter duty, which encouraged me to answer the question with this short video for the benefit of other people. First of all, I want to make it abundantly clear that I am not speculating on when the churches will be opened again. I only mentioned Pentecost because it comes up in the rules for what has traditionally been known as the Easter duty. This duty is a minimum requirement for the reception of Holy Communion, and because the Eucharist must only be received by Catholics in the state of grace, the Easter duty is also connected with the sacrament of confession. Canon 920 of the Code of Canon Law tells us, 1. Once admitted to the Blessed Eucharist, each of the faithful is obliged to receive Holy Communion at least once a year. And 2, this precept must be fulfilled during Paschaltide, unless for a good reason it is fulfilled at another time during the year. So all Catholics who have received their First Communion must receive the Eucharist at some point between Easter Sunday and Pentecost, the end of the Easter season. And I think that it is safe to say that if the churches will still be closed on Pentecost, no one need worry about failing to do their Easter duty, because church closures would certainly be a good reason to postpone the Easter duty. I should also mention that the canon I quoted is for universal church law. Historically, there were special indults given to various regions to redefine Paschal time for the purposes of the Easter duty to begin as early as Ash Wednesday and go on until Trinity Sunday. It is actually difficult to find the exact definition of the Easter duty in any particular region. I suppose that one of the reasons that so few people know about the Easter duty is that frequent communion has now become the norm. At one level, St. Philip would approve of this custom. He was one of the Counter-Reformation saints who advocated frequent Holy Communion in the 16th century. In the medieval times, Catholics did not receive communion as frequently, out of a great sense of reverence for the sacrament. Priests used to preach strong sermons against the unworthy reception of communion, and the laity thought that they would somehow detract from the Eucharist if its reception became a weekly or even a daily occurrence. So, although people would go to Mass frequently, because they recognized that the Mass was the sacrifice of Calvary made present for them, they would refrain from receiving communion. There was a need to overcome such reluctance on the part of those who were seeking true holiness. Yes, the Mass is a sacrifice, but it is also a sacred banquet. We need the spiritual sustenance to remain and to grow in charity, the love of God. So St. Philip and many other saints and popes in modern times advocated frequent communion. But these saints and popes always insisted that only Catholics in the state of grace should approach the Eucharist. This latter requirement is often forgotten in modern practice. It is based on St. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 11, right after the apostle described the institution of the Eucharist. He writes, "Whoever therefore eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of profaning the body and blood of the Lord. Let a man examine himself, and so eat of the bread and drink of the cup. For if anyone who eats and drinks without discerning the body eats and drinks judgment upon himself." Today, Canon 916 states, "Anyone who is conscious of grave sin may not celebrate Mass or receive the body of the Lord without previously having been to sacramental confession, unless there is a grave reason and there is no opportunity to confess. In this case, the person is to remember the obligation to make an act of perfect contrition, which includes the resolve to go to confession as soon as possible." There are some people who are not able to receive Holy Communion because they are not ready to part with serious sin. It would be wrong for such people to receive communion or to go to confession without a serious resolution to break with sin. Irregular marriage situations are the most obvious cases of this predicament. The Church reminds all such people to keep coming to Mass because, although they cannot participate in the sacred banquet by receiving communion, they can at least be present at Christ's life-giving sacrifice, and along with everyone else, ask Him for mercy and the grace to break with sin. So long as the churches are closed, there is no possibility of anyone receiving the Blessed Sacrament. So it is a good time to remind ourselves of the practice of spiritual communion. We tell our Lord in prayer that we would like to be united with Him. There is a very good explanation of the practice on the Oratory's website. Just go to the home page, oratory-toronto.org, and click on COVID-19 to find the link. As I mentioned at the outset, the Easter duty is sometimes thought of as a necessity to go to confession during Paschal time. The exact wording of Canon 989 is, "All the faithful who have reached the age of discretion are bound faithfully to confess their grave sins at least once a year." When frequent communion was not the norm, this duty to confess would be tied to Easter, because in order to do one's Easter duty by receiving communion, one would go to confession at around the same time. But notice that there is not a strict time limit on the canon, and it can even be argued that if one does not have any grave sins on one's conscience, one can put off going to confession for more than a year. Although technically true, I would still recommend going to confession more often. If we put it off, our standards fall, and we deprive ourselves of the grace we can receive by confessing our venial sins on a regular basis. I'm edified by the obvious desire of so many people today to receive the Eucharist. It is a real hardship for them not to be able to receive communion. So I encourage you to practice spiritual communion at this time and to cultivate a deep desire, a deep thirst for the Eucharist, so that, please God, when the churches are opened once more, you will benefit all the more by receiving the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ, not just at Easter, but frequently.